Welcome to the Audible presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Stewart Mandel, joined by Bruce Feldman. And as we get into the start of the college football season, obviously people want to know which coaches are on the hot seat. And Bruce, with Bill Belichick kicking off his second season at UNC, obviously the first season did not go well, and there's been a lot of off-season drama there. Where do your sources feel like his chances of making it to year 3 are right now?
Stu, I talked to a bunch of folks, in the category of industry sources, and they were very skeptical we're going to see a year 3 of Bill Belichick at North Carolina. You start calling around, and I think that's the sense a lot of folks inside the business think. And we're talking about like agents, source, we're talking about, people who are involved with search firms and different things. And, one of the people I talked to said, I'd be shocked if he's coaching here next year. I mean, it's a mess there with Lombardi's issues. He's obviously, Mike Lombardi, the GM, he's obviously on a leave right now, paid leave. You got Steve Belichick, the defensive coordinator. He's on a medical leave. He's not expected to be in Dublin when they play TCU, who, as you know, TCU blew them out last year. It was in Chapel Hill. That was a lopsided game. The other, things that come up a lot with Belichick are if he gets off to a really bad start, and what we're talking about here is probably a 1-3, the way it could shape up, especially if they lose this game, right? If TCU beats them, then all of a sudden you got East Tennessee State. They should win that, right? And then you're 1-1. But then you go to Clemson and you play Notre Dame, right? And so last year, remember, this wasn't a team that just gotten thumped by TCU at home. They got destroyed by UCF. UCF beat them like 34-9. So we know he's getting $10 million a year. We also know, Stu, that it's not got one of these like long Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley contracts, right? It's a 3-year deal. So where do they move out from that? Again, if he's staring at a 1-3 start, because then they have a couple of like tougher ACC games that are on the road. He could have 5 losses by mid-season. But again, this is a huge game. I know it's not a great week 0, but because it's Bill Belichick, because he is playing a team that destroyed them last year, I don't know. Let's see what Bobby Petrino, can he fix the offense? Because that was a big issue for them last year.
Yeah, it's really crazy how, you and I and several of our colleagues were part of a pretty deeply reported story middle of last season, right after those blowouts started piling up, about what exactly is going on there in Chapel Hill. And it painted a pretty dysfunctional picture. And it's not like here we are a year later and things have stabilized. If anything, they've gotten crazier. The GM's under investigation. The defense coordinator, who is his son, is on medical leave. There's been more Jordan Hudson things, her requesting certain emails, and then I haven't heard anything one way or the other about Bobby Petrino, but generally speaking, drama sometimes follows Bobby Petrino. So, boy, I wish there was a Hulu documentary about that team right now. But like you said, the schedule works against him. Even if we give them the benefit of the doubt that the roster is a little bit better, I don't know if it is. The schedule's harder, and this came up. Ralph and I were talking the other day on the Audible about the research that David Ubben and Sam Kahn did about career snap counts and career starts. And UNC has the second least experienced roster in all of Power 4. Where other teams have tried to get old, they intentionally went young. And that doesn't necessarily bode well. But you never truly know till they get on the field what they're going to look like. I don't fully know what TCU is going to look like. I know Ralph is very high on them. He has them winning the Big 12. But, they're relying on a QB we haven't seen play at this level yet from the Ivy League. Now, here's your quarterback matchup. Jaden Craig, who was a 2-time Walter Payton Award finalist. That's basically the FCS Heisman. And then on the other side, you have Billy Edwards, who's bounced around, was at Maryland, was at Wisconsin, has been largely underwhelming to this point. Again, maybe Bobby Petrino can get something else out of him. I know they feel like they're pretty good in the run game. I don't know. I'd ask you this. Would you be
I don't know if I would be shocked if North Carolina, I feel like you're banging a head against the wall a little bit, but if North Carolina would knock off TCU, even after what happened last year in Chapel Hill.
No, I wouldn't be shocked, but it would certainly, I think, change the narrative pretty quickly around them. Though maybe they're not so bad. In college football, we wait 8 months for the season to start, so naturally we all wildly overreact to the first game. Remember, we thought Florida State had fixed all its issues after last year's opener against Florida State, and sometimes those first games can be very deceiving. But certainly, it would it would stave off or hold off or delay the story of like, oh, what an impending disaster this is. There's another team that I kind of fully expect to be an impending disaster, and that's Florida State. And Mike Norvell kind of got a reprieve after last season, after 2 straight losing years, because the buyout was so big. But now they get to this season, and it's like, okay, Ashton Daniels was your big answer at quarterback. And we didn't really see them put together like a really acclaimed portal class. Am I right in saying he's probably on the hottest seat in the country?
That's the way it feels to me too, Stu. I mean, so they're sitting there. It probably cost them about $45 million to move on from him. That's a big number for Florida State, as somebody else in the business put it. It's like they don't have USC money, for lack of a better term here. And I think it was a good point you just alluded to about they didn't go swinging for the fences in the portal. As one person who's inside the business explained, it was like they spent, their budget is more in lines with USF than UM. Meaning,
isn't that crazy?
When it came,
I've heard the same thing, and that's crazy.
Yeah, when it came to the portal, that's about as deep as pocket as they were going to get. They were in line with the USF. They were not spending like Miami, who's obviously their arch rival in the ACC. And this other person, as he explained it to me, was like, it makes you feel like their money people are saving their money for something else.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That would be interesting here. Now, I think Mike Norvell's a really good coach. Obviously, he had a couple of terrific seasons, and I felt like he got Florida State out of the ditch, but maybe they kind of went back in right after. They had the 2-win season. Last year was better. It wasn't that much better though. They won 5 games, but then they got blown out by kind of a rudderless Florida team at the end of the year. You look at this schedule now. I'm going to kind of go through it, and where I see why it's so interesting, because the first half of the schedule is really daunting. You have 4 top 25 opponents in the first 7 games, and 3 of them, it's at Alabama, at number 24 Louisville. So it's number 13 Alabama, number 24 Louisville, and at number 7 Miami. All of them are on the road. The other games in that stretch, home against SMU, they're a good team, who's a top 25 team, and Virginia, who should still be pretty good. And that Miami game they have a bye week after that. That is the part where you're like, man, if they're sitting there at 3-4, as you know, bye weeks are the times when a lot of times, schools decide, hey, we're going to rip the Band-Aid off now and make a change. And, if he's 4-3, you have a path forward to maybe get to 8-4. But I don't know from, again, talking to industry sources, is 8-4 going to be good enough? It depends how those losses look. It also
depends on who they beat.
It does.
But let's be honest, Bruce, when you're talking about a roster that's more in the USF range, and I think Miami's on a whole other planet. So it's not like, oh, they have less, but like they have less than some pretty mediocre programs in the ACC. So how are they going to get to 8-4 with more of a 4-8 kind of roster? And that's the unfortunate thing for Mike Norvell, is he kind of blew it with a really expensive relative to what it was in 2024. This market was 2 years ago, high-priced, highly regarded roster, and that was a debacle. It couldn't have gone worse. Yeah. And now he's trying to climb his way out of that, and he doesn't have the kind of talent that he had 2 years ago. So it's really an interesting window into the hot seat in the NIL era, where it almost becomes a self-fulfilling cycle.
Yeah, I do think he has some good firepower to work with. Mekhi Danzy's a really dynamic, one of the fastest players in the country. Deuce Robinson's one of the better receivers in the country. Now, can Daniels get him the ball? Daniels was up and down. There were some times he looked pretty good last year in the little bit he played. But I get why there'd be skepticism. Their D-line is actually talented too. The part that I brought up to someone who I would trust in the business on these things was, here you are, if you're a Florida State money person, and your arch rival is Miami, and they just played for the national title, and they are spending a lot of money, and they're what feels like the powerhouse, setting its traction in the ACC. Then on the other arch rival you have, it's Florida. John Summerall has definitely got momentum at UF. If John Summerall has them in the top 25 and they're better than Florida State, I think it's going to be tough for the Seminole brass to stomach at this point. And because it just doesn't feel like there's great alignment there. Again, I think Mike Norvell is a good coach. Somebody painted this scenario to me, was like, hey, if Charles Huff, who took a bunch of roster, his roster from Southern Miss, if he has Memphis in like playoff consideration and he's getting looked at for bigger jobs, and if Memphis is coming open in a year, do they look and say, hey, we're going to bring Mike Norvell back, and then there's some mitigation for Florida State? And is that a path forward?
You're going several. I thought you were talking about the Florida State hiring Charles Huff. You're talking about like the next level down of like Charles Huff gets another job and Mike Norvell goes back to Memphis. We haven't even played the first game of this season.
Yeah, I know. That's the nature of these conversations when you're talking to different people inside the business on coaching carousel stuff.
All right, so I think that Florida State will beat Duquesne this weekend, but I'm more curious to see how many empty seats there are, because that'll be a little bit of a gauge of where the fan interest level is right now. We're excited to watch some games this weekend. The Audible, once the season starts, and it does this weekend, the Audible, we have a live show every Sunday morning, and we have further episodes on Tuesdays and Thursdays throughout the season where we make our picks for the next week's big games, where we talk about all the biggest storylines in college football. So please subscribe to this channel, and we will see you this weekend.